The galaxy watched in horror as the video feed went live. Thula, the sadistic ruler of the Bolian race, stood before a bound and gagged human child, tears streaming down her small, bruised face. "Let this be a warning," Thule rasped, his eyes cold and merciless. "Defy the Council's will, and this is the fate that awaits you." In one swift motion, he raised his disruptor pistol and fired, the girl's body crumpling to the floor. Liza Hendricks, the 6-year-old daughter of the human ambassador, was dead, murdered in cold blood as a message to all who would challenge the Galactic Council's tyrannical rule. Her father's anguished screams echoed through the broadcast, a haunting soundtrack to the barbaric act. On Earth, the news spread like wildfire, igniting a firestorm of outrage and fury. The streets filled with protesters, their cries for justice and retribution rising to a deafening roar. In a historic display of solidarity, every nation on the planet united under a single banner, setting aside centuries of conflict to face a common enemy. The United Earth government wasted no time, immediately declaring war on the Galactic Council and mobilizing the full might of humanity's military. Leading the charge was Admiral Eugene Mason, a brilliant strategist driven by personal tragedy. Liza had been his beloved niece. With a fierce determination burning in his eyes, Eugene threw himself into preparations for the coming battle, overseeing the construction of a massive fleet of advanced warships. As word of Earth's impending attack spread, whispers of rebellion began to stir among the Council's subjugated races. In secret, planet leaders reached out to Eugene, pledging their support and resources to the human cause. The stage was set for a war unlike any the galaxy had ever seen, a clash between the ruthless oppressors and a species united by grief, anger, and an unbreakable will to fight for justice. The Council, confident in their superiority, remained blind to the gathering storm and to the true strength of an enraged humanity. In the hidden shipyards of Luna, the sparks of 1,000 welding torches lit the vacuum as Earth's fleet took shape. Sleek battlecruisers and nimble destroyers grew from skeletal frameworks into deadly machines of war, their hulls emblazoned with the emblems of a dozen nations united in purpose. Amidst the ordered chaos, a shuttle descended towards the central command module, carrying a passenger whose arrival would change the course of the conflict. Admiral Eugene Mason strode into the shipyard's command center, his eyes blazing with nearly unleashed fury. The loss of his niece had torn open old wounds, the scars of a lifetime spent fighting the Council's tyranny. But as he looked out over the assembled fleet, he felt a flicker of hope. These ships, crewed by men and women from every corner of Earth, represented the unbreakable spirit of his people. With them at his side, he would make the Council pay for every drop of innocent blood they had spilled. As Eugene pored over readiness reports and tactical simulations, the command center's doors slid open, admitting an unexpected visitor. Dr. Alara Zendari, her lilac skin and iridescent eyes marking her as Zephyrian, approached the Admiral with an air of quiet willpower. In halting English, she explained her people's plight and offered their most closely guarded secrets in exchange for the promise of liberation. Eugene listened intently, his mind racing with the possibilities. Zephyrian technology was the stuff of legend, jealously guarded by the Council. With their advanced weapons and shielding integrated into Earth's fleet, they would have a fighting chance against the Bolian Armada. More than that, Alara's proposal represented an opportunity to forge the alliances that would be crucial in the battles to come. "You have my word," Eugene said, clasping Alara's hand in a firm grip. "When the Council falls, Zephyr will be free." Over the next days and weeks, the shipyards became a hive of activity as Zephyrian engineers worked alongside their human counterparts to upgrade the fleet. Shimmering energy shields encased the ship's hulls, while lances of searing light replaced the clunky railguns of old. As the final preparations were made, Eugene gathered his captains for a briefing on their first target, the Bolian stronghold at Tarvos Prime. The attack came without warning, the human fleet dropping out of warp at the very edge of the Tarvos system. On the bridge of the EDS Retribution, Eugene watched as the Bolian ships scrambled to meet them, their formation clumsy and disorganized. With a wordless signal, he unleashed the full might of Earth's arsenal. The battle was joined, the void lit by the flare of missiles and the shimmer of colliding energy fields. The Bolian ships were powerful, but slow and uncoordinated, their crews no match for the skill and willpower of Eugene's hand-picked officers. Again and again, the human ships darted in to strike at the enemy's flanks and rear, their superior speed and maneuverability turning the tide of battle. At the height of the fighting, the Retribution shuddered under a direct hit, sparks cascading across the bridge as Eugene was thrown from his feet. Alarms blared as the damage reports flooded in, and with a sinking heart, the Admiral learned of the casualties, his own son among them. For a moment, grief threatened to overwhelm him, but he pushed it aside, forcing himself to focus on the task at hand. With a final, desperate push, the human fleet broke through the Bolian defenses, missiles and energy beams raking across the shipyard's skeletal superstructure. Explosions blossomed in the void as the critical infrastructure collapsed, consigning half-built warships to oblivion. As the last Bolian ship fled into warp, a ragged cheer went up from the human crews. Against impossible odds, they had won the day. But even as he joined in the celebration, Eugene knew that this was only the beginning. The Council would not let such a blow go unanswered, and the war for the galaxy's future was just the beginning. As he looked out over the wreckage of Tarvos Prime, he silently renewed his vow to see justice done, at any expense. With Earth's allies at their side, they would press on, liberating world after world until the Council's cruel empire was nothing more than a bitter memory. The acrid smell of burnt circuitry lingered in the air as Eugene Mason slowly regained consciousness. His head throbbed, a sharp reminder of the Battle of Tarvos Prime's chaos. As his vision cleared, he found himself in the Retribution's medbay, surrounded by the hum of medical equipment and the hushed voices of his crew. "Admiral, you're awake," Dr. Alara Zendari's lilting voice cut through the fog of pain. "How do you feel?" Eugene grunted, pushing himself up despite the protest of his battered body. "I'll live. Status report?" Before Alara could answer, a young ensign burst into the medbay, his face flushed with urgency. "Sir, we've received a priority communication. It's coded for your eyes only." Ignoring the doctor's protests, Eugene swung his legs off the bed and followed the ensign to a secure communications terminal. As the message decrypted, his eyes widened in surprise. The sender's identity flashed on the screen. Thalia Zendari. The recording flickered to life, revealing a face strikingly similar to Alara's, though marked by a jagged scar running from temple to jaw. Thalia's voice was low and urgent as she spoke. "Admiral Mason, I pray this reaches you in time. I've been deep cover in Council intelligence for years. What I've uncovered, it changes everything. The Bolians are recalling their reserve fleet from the outer territories. It's massive, Eugene, unlike anything we've faced, and it's led by Admiral Zek Tharn." Eugene's blood ran cold at the name. Tharn's reputation for ruthless efficiency was legendary, even among the Bolians. Thalia continued, her eyes darting off-screen nervously. "You have to strike now, before Tharn arrives. Hit Nexus, the Council's command center. Take out their leadership and comms, and you might have a chance. But be warned, Nexus is a fortress. The Aegis shield makes it nearly impenetrable." The message cut off abruptly, leaving Eugene staring at a blank screen. His mind raced, weighing options and calculating risks. A direct assault on Nexus would be suicide. Unless... "Dr. Zendari," he called out, his voice steady despite the pain still coursing through him. "I need you in my ready room. Now." Hours later, Eugene stood before a holographic display of Nexus, surrounded by his top officers and allies. Captain Marcus Reeves, his most trusted lieutenant, studied the swirling mass of defenses with a grim expression. "It's a death trap, sir," Marcus said, shaking his head. "Those orbital platforms alone could shred our fleet before we got close." Eugene nodded, then gestured to Alara. "Show them." The Zephyrian scientist tapped a series of commands, and a shimmering field appeared around a small cluster of ships in the display. "We've modified our cloaking technology," she explained. "It won't last long, but it should get a small team past the outer defenses." "And once they're planetside?" Marcus asked, his interest piqued. Eugene's eyes gleamed with drive. "They take down the Aegis from the inside. Captain, I want you to lead the infiltration team. Choose your best. You'll only get one shot at this. As Marcus saluted and hurried off to assemble his team, Eugene turned back to the star map. He traced a finger along potential approach vectors, formulating a plan to draw the Council's attention away from Nexus. Signal the fleet, he ordered. It's time to remind the Council why they should fear humanity. Days later, alarms blared across a dozen Council outposts as Earthships materialized from hyperspace. Laser fire lanced through the void, precision strikes crippling communications arrays, and defensive emplacements. As predicted, the Council's response was swift and brutal. But scattered, their forces spread thin, trying to defend against multiple simultaneous attacks. Aboard the Retribution, Eugene watched the chaos unfold with grim satisfaction. A crackling comm signal drew his attention. "Infiltration team is away, sir," Marcus's voice came through, tense but focused. "Beginning our approach to Nexus." Eugene allowed himself a small nod of acknowledgement. "Godspeed, Captain. We'll keep them busy out here." As the diversionary attacks raged on, Marcus's team slipped through Nexus's orbital defense grid, their modified cloaking field holding steady. The tension in their small craft was palpable as they broke atmosphere, streaking towards the coordinates of the Aegis Control Center. Lieutenant Cara Saldana's fingers flew across her console, bypassing security protocols and planting false sensor readings to mask their approach. Beside her, Sergeant Rake Talor gripped his massive warhammer, cybernetic implants gleaming beneath craggy Kragarian skin. 2 minutes to touchdown, Marcus called out, his voice steady despite the stakes. "You all know the mission. Get me to that control room, and we bring down the Aegis. For Earth. For everyone the Council has ever hurt. We end this here." The transport shuddered as it touched down in a secluded ravine near the facility. As one, the team moved out, weapons at the ready. The first Bolian patrol never saw them coming. Inside the sprawling Aegis complex, alarms began to sound. Marcus and his team froze, their weapons trained on the corridor ahead. Shadows flickered at the intersection, growing larger as footsteps approached. 3 hostiles, Cara whispered, her augmented vision piercing the gloom. "Armed and alert." Marcus nodded, signaling to Reek. The Kragarian grinned, cybernetic implants glowing faintly as he readied his warhammer. In a blur of motion, Rake charged forward, his massive frame filling the corridor. The Bolian guards barely had time to raise their weapons before Rick was upon them, his hammer crackling with energy as it swept them aside. "Clear," Reek rumbled, his gravelly voice tinged with satisfaction. Marcus led the team forward, stepping over the unconscious guards. "We're close. Cara, how much time?" The lieutenant consulted her wrist computer. 7 minutes until the fleet's diversion runs out. We need to move." They sprinted down twisting corridors, relying on stolen schematics and Cara's hacking skills to bypass security checkpoints. Finally, they reached a massive set of blast doors emblazoned with the Bolian insignia. "This is it," Marcus breathed. "The Aegis Control Center. Cara, work your magic." As Cara's fingers danced across her hollow interface, alarms suddenly blared throughout the facility. Red emergency lights bathed the corridor in an eerie glow. "They've detected us," Cara shouted over the din. "I need more time." "You'll have it," Marcus growled, readying his pulse rifle. "Reich, with me. We hold this position at all costs." The first wave of Bolian security forces rounded the corner, energy weapons blazing. Marcus and Reich returned fire, their precise shots dropping guards even as they sought cover. The air filled with the acrid smell of ozone and burning metal as the battle raged. Inside the Aegis control room, Council technicians scrambled to lock down systems and purge sensitive data. The lead operator, a grizzled Bolian veteran, barked orders as he initiated emergency protocols. "Seal all exits. Reroute power to secondary nodes. We cannot let them—" His words were cut short as the blast doors exploded inward in a shower of superheated metal. Through the smoke strode Marcus and his team, weapons raised. "Step away from the consoles," Marcus commanded, his voice cold as steel. "Now!" The Bolians hesitated, weighing their options. Reich hefted his blood-spattered warhammer meaningfully, and their resistance crumbled. "Cara, shut it down," Marcus ordered, keeping his rifle trained on the cowering technicians. Lieutenant Saldana's fingers flew across the Aegis control terminal, bypassing firewalls and overriding failsafes. On the main view screen, a schematic of Nexus's planetary shield flickered and pulsed. "Almost there," Kara muttered, sweat beading on her brow. "Just one more." The screen flashed green, and a wave of energy rippled across the planet's surface. The impenetrable Aegis shield wavered and dissipated, leaving Nexus exposed. Marcus tapped his comm unit. "Admiral Mason, Aegis is down. I repeat, Aegis is down. Nexus is vulnerable." Thousands of kilometers above, aboard the Retribution, Eugene Mason allowed himself a grim smile. "Well done, Captain. All ships, this is Admiral Mason. Commence Phase 2. Take Nexus." The void around Nexus erupted in brilliant flashes as the human fleet engaged the Bolian defenders. With their primary defense neutralized, the Council forces fought desperately, but they were outmatched by the fury and skill of Eugene's pilots. As the battle raged, Eugene received an urgent communique from Earth. His eyes widened as he decrypted the message, its contents confirming his worst fears. "New contact," a sensor operator called out. "Massive hyperspace signature detected. Sir, it's unlike anything we've ever seen." Eugene's eyes sharp as he studied the tactical display. The intel was accurate. Admiral Zek Tharn's reinforcement fleet had arrived, and it was even more formidable than they had anticipated. "All ships, regroup and prepare for evasive maneuvers," Eugene ordered, his mind racing. "We've won a critical victory here, but we can't stand against Tharn's armada. Not yet." As the human fleet disengaged from Nexus, Eugene turned to his communications officer. "Get me a secure channel to Dr. Zendari. We need to accelerate our plans." In the hours that followed, Eugene convened an emergency war council with his top officers and allies. The holographic display showed the grim reality. Tharn's forces were already moving to retake Nexus, while simultaneous attacks had been launched against several liberated worlds. "We're outgunned and spread too thin," Captain Reeves said, studying the tactical projections. "If we try to defend everywhere at once, we'll be picked apart." Eugene nodded, his expression resolute. "Agreed, which is why we're not going to defend. We're going on the offensive." He manipulated the holo display, zooming in on a particular region of space. "Intelligence from Agent Thalia Zendari indicates that Tharn will gather his disparate fleets here, in the Aurelian Nebula, before launching his main assault." Dr. Alara Zendari leaned forward, her iridescent eyes widening. "The nebula's ionic storms would mask their approach. It's the perfect staging ground." "Exactly," Eugene said, "and it's where we're going to strike. We'll hit Tharn before he can consolidate his forces, using the nebula's cover to our advantage." Lieutenant Saldana studied the plan, her cybernetic implants processing tactical simulations. "It's risky, sir. We'll be deep in enemy territory with no support." "Sometimes the greatest risk is not taking one," Eugene replied. "I'm hand-selecting a strike force for this mission. Marcus, Kara, Alara, I want you with me. We leave in 6 hours." As the council dispersed to make preparations, Eugene received another priority message. This one was from Thalia Zendari herself, her face lined with urgency. "Eugene, be careful," she warned. "Tharn is cunning and ruthless. He'll stop at nothing to crush this rebellion. But if you can take him out, it might just turn the tide of this war." Eugene's eyes hardened with determination. "Understood, Thalia. We won't let this opportunity slip away. One way or another, this ends in the Aurelian Nebula." The Retribution's engines flared to life, leading a small but elite strike force into the swirling depths of the nebula. As they disappeared into the roiling clouds of charged particles, Eugene knew that the fate of humanity, and indeed the entire galaxy, hung in the balance of their next move. The swirling energies of the Aurelian Nebula churned around the Retribution as Eugene's strike force emerged from the ionic storms. Ahead, Admiral Tharn's invasion fleet hung in space, caught off guard by the sudden appearance of human ships. "All vessels, weapons free," Eugene commanded, his voice steady despite the tension thrumming through the bridge. "Hit them hard and fast." The void erupted in a dazzling display of energy weapons and explosions as the two fleets collided. Eugene's smaller force struck with surgical precision, targeting command ships and support vessels. Tharn's forces, still scattered and unprepared, struggled to mount an effective defense. On the tactical display, Eugene watched as Cara Saldana's squadron darted between larger Bolian cruisers, their modified engines leaving trails of ionic distortion. The lieutenant's voice crackled over the comm. "Shields down on their flagship, Admiral, opening a path for you." Eugene nodded to his helmsman. "Take us in. It's time to end this." The Retribution surged forward, its main guns blazing. Tharn's crippled flagship loomed before them, escape pods jettisoning from its hull. As they closed in for the killing blow, alarms blared across the bridge. "New contacts," the sensor officer shouted. "Multiple signatures. Sir, it's a trap." From the depths of the nebula, a second Bolian fleet materialized. Caught between two forces, Eugene's strike team found themselves outgunned and surrounded. "Evasive maneuvers," Eugene ordered, his mind racing. "All ships, prepare for emergency jump on my mark." As his fleet disengaged, scattering to pre-planned coordinates, Eugene allowed himself a grim smile. They may not have destroyed Tharn's invasion force, but they had dealt it a crippling blow. More importantly, they had gained vital intelligence on Bolian fleet movements and capabilities. Back at the rendezvous point, Eugene convened an emergency war council. The holographic display showed the grim reality of their situation. The Bolian Empire still held vast swathes of territory, and their production capabilities far outstripped those of the Human Alliance. "We can't match them ship for ship," Captain Reeves stated, studying the tactical projections. "We need a new strategy." Eugene nodded, his eyes fixed on the galactic map. "Agreed, which is why we're going to hit them where it hurts most." He zoomed in on a particular sector, revealing a heavily fortified world. "Tharkon, the Bolian homeworld." A murmur of surprise rippled through the assembled officers. Alara Zendari leaned forward, her iridescent eyes wide. "Admiral, Tharkon's defenses are impenetrable. Even with our entire fleet, a direct assault would be suicide." "That's why we're not going to attack it directly," Eugene replied, a hint of steel in his voice. "We're going to make them come to us." Over the next hours, Eugene laid out his audacious plan. Strike teams would hit vital Bolian supply lines and shipyards across multiple systems, forcing the Council to divert ships for their defense. Meanwhile, the bulk of their fleet would push towards Tharkon, exploiting the gaps in their defenses. As the Council dispersed to make preparations, Eugene received a priority communication from Thalia Zendari. Her face was lined with urgency as she spoke. "I've identified key targets for your first wave of raids," she said, transmitting a data packet. "But be careful, Eugene. The Council is growing desperate. They'll stop at nothing to crush this rebellion." Eugene's eyes hardened with drive. "Understood, Thalia. We won't let this opportunity slip away. One way or another, this ends at Tharkon." Days later, Eugene stood on the bridge of the Retribution, watching as his fleet prepared for the first wave of attacks. He turned to Captain Reeves, who would be leading the diversionary strikes. "You know your targets, Marcus. Hit them hard and fast, then get out. We need to keep them off balance." Reeves nodded, his expression grim but determined. "Understood, sir. We'll give them hell." As Reeves's squadrons jumped away, Eugene focused on his own objective, the massive shipyards orbiting Zendri 5. He activated the ship-wide comm. "All hands, this is the Admiral. Today we strike at the heart of the Bolian war machine. Our actions here will determine the fate of countless worlds. Remember why we fight: for Earth, for freedom, for a future where no species need fear oppression. Now, let's show the Council what humanity is capable of." The Retribution's engines flared to life, leading the strike force towards their target. As they approached Zendri 5, Eugene activated the new disruptive technology provided by Dr. Zendari. The Bolian sensors flickered and went dark, leaving their orbital defenses blind. "All ships, weapons free," Eugene commanded. "Cripple those shipyards." The void erupted in brilliant flashes as human vessels unleashed their fury on the unprepared Bolian facilities. Incomplete warships shattered under the barrage, while docking clamps and fabrication arrays exploded in chains of secondary detonations. As the Retribution banked away from a crippled Bolian cruiser, Eugene allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. The first blow had been struck. Now the real battle for Tharkon and the fate of the stars was about to begin. The Retribution shuddered as another volley of Bolian torpedoes impacted its shields. Admiral Eugene Mason gripped the command chair, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. Tharkon loomed before them, its orbital defenses blazing with energy weapons. "Shields at 32%, Lieutenant Saldana reported, her fingers dancing across her console. "We can't take much more of this." Mason nodded grimly. "All ships, focus fire on Grid Sector 7. We need to punch through their defensive line." The human fleet surged forward, concentrating their firepower on a weak point in the Bolian formation. Explosions blossomed in the void as ships on both sides were torn apart by the furious exchange. Suddenly, a brilliant flash erupted from the planet's surface. A massive energy beam lanced out, catching the Retribution broadside. The bridge exploded in a shower of sparks and debris. Mason was thrown from his chair, his head slamming against a bulkhead. As darkness closed in around him, he heard Saldana's distant voice. "Admiral down! Medical team to the bridge!" When Mason regained consciousness, he found himself in a sterile hospital room, surrounded by beeping medical equipment. He tried to sit up but found his body unresponsive, racked with pain. A doctor approached, her expression grave. "Admiral, you've suffered severe injuries. We're doing everything we can, but your condition is critical." Mason's mind raced, piecing together fragmented memories. The battle. What happened? The doctor hesitated. "Sir, the Bolian Empire has surrendered. Tharkon has fallen, but the situation is complicated." Over the following days, Mason drifted in and out of consciousness, catching glimpses of the chaos unfolding across the galaxy. Reports filtered in of warlords seizing control of outlying systems, of allied convoys under attack from unknown aggressors. In his more lucid moments, Mason received updates from his officers. Captain Reeves appeared via hologram, his face haggard with exhaustion. "We're doing our best to maintain order, sir," Reeves reported. "But without a central authority, it's like trying to herd cats. Everyone's vying for a piece of the pie." Mason tried to respond, but a fit of coughing overtook him. Reeves's image flickered with concern. "Rest, Admiral. We'll hold things together until you're back on your feet." But as the days stretched into weeks, Mason's condition showed little improvement. He lay in his hospital bed, listening to the increasingly dire reports from across Allied space. Opportunistic factions launched raids on vulnerable worlds. Newly liberated races petitioned for protection, stretching Allied resources to the breaking point. And through it all, Mason could only watch helplessly as the fragile peace they had fought so hard to achieve began to crumble. Then came the plague. It started as isolated outbreaks on frontier worlds, but quickly spread like wildfire. Within days, entire systems were quarantined as a mutagenic bioweapon ravaged populations. Dr. Alara Zendari appeared at Mason's bedside, her eyes wild with fear and lack of sleep. "It's Zolkir," she explained, her voice trembling. "He must have had a contingency plan. We're working around the clock on a cure, but, Eugene, it's bad. Really bad." Mason closed his eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. The alliance was fracturing, plague was spreading, and he was powerless to stop it. But as he teetered on the brink of despair, something within Eugene Mason ignited. A spark of defiance, of stubborn human resilience. He opened his eyes, meeting Alara's gaze with steely commitment. "Get me a secure quantum channel," he rasped. "It's time to remind everyone why we fought this war in the first place." Alara hesitated, glancing at the medical readouts. "Eugene, you're in no condition to—" "Now, doctor," Mason interrupted, "before it's too late." As Alara hurried to comply, Mason gathered what strength remained in his battered body. The galaxy was balanced on a knife's edge, and he would be damned if he let it fall into chaos on his watch. The quantum communicator hummed to life, and Eugene Mason prepared to address the Allied worlds. His voice might be weak, his body broken, but his will remained unshaken. The real work of forging a lasting peace was just beginning. The quantum communicator crackled to life as Eugene Mason's voice, though weak, carried the weight of his convictions across the Allied worlds. Citizens of the Alliance, this is Admiral Eugene Mason. We stand at a crossroads. The Bolian Empire has fallen, but chaos threatens to consume us. I hereby invoke Emergency Protocol Omega. Effective immediately, all Allied worlds are under martial law. Protests erupted across countless planets, but Mason's iron drive did not waver. He dispatched loyal forces to key strategic locations, establishing a network of military control that spanned the Allied systems. In the following weeks, Mason's body slowly began to heal, though he remained confined to his medical bay. Captain Reeves entered, his face grim. "Sir, we've uncovered something disturbing during the interrogation of Bolian officials." Mason's eyes narrowed. "Go on." Reeves activated a holographic display, revealing schematics of terrifying biological constructs. They call them xenogens, bioweapons designed to target specific alien physiologies. And sir, they've already been deployed. As if on cue, alarms blared throughout the facility. Dr. Alara Zendari burst into the room, her face ashen. "Eugene, we have reports coming in from multiple colonies. It's a nightmare." The holographic display shifted, showing live feeds from affected worlds. Mason watched in horror as civilians writhed in agony, their bodies twisting and mutating into grotesque, violent abominations. "Initiate immediate quarantine protocols," Mason ordered, his voice hoarse. "Captain Reeves, coordinate emergency evacuations. We need to contain this before it spreads further." Days turned into weeks as the xenogen crisis unfolded. Mason, now able to move with the aid of an exoskeleton, stood on the bridge of the Retribution, watching as orbital bombardments scoured infected colonies. Lieutenant Saldana approached, her eyes red-rimmed from sleepless nights. "Admiral, we've traced the virus deployment. It's being controlled by automated Bolian systems. Dead man switches." Mason nodded grimly. "Assemble a strike team. We need to take those systems offline." In a secure laboratory, Dr. Zendari worked feverishly alongside a team of Allied scientists. Holographic displays showed the rapidly mutating xenogen strains. "Conventional treatments are useless," she muttered, frustration evident in her voice. "We need something unorthodox." Her eyes fell on a sample of human DNA, and a spark of inspiration ignited. What if we could use our own genetic structure against it? As Zendari's team embarked on their desperate genetic gambit, Sergeant Taylor led his strike force through the corrupted halls of a Bolian facility. Xenomorphic horrors lurched from the shadows, their distorted forms barely recognizable as once sentient beings. "Hold the line!" Taylor shouted, his pulse rifle spitting death at the advancing monstrosities. "We need to reach that control center." Aboard the Retribution, Captain Reeves coordinated the massive evacuation efforts. Streams of civilian ships fled infected worlds, each one subjected to rigorous decontamination protocols. "Quarantine breach in Sector 7, an ensign shouted. "Xenogen spores detected on multiple evacuation vessels." Reeves closed his eyes, knowing the terrible decision that had to be made. Seal off the sector. We can't risk further contamination. Months passed, and the tide of the xenogen crisis began to turn. Dr. Zendari's human-derived treatments showed promise, while Taylor's teams systematically dismantled the Bolian dead hand systems. But as Mason stood before the newly formed Allied Coalition Council, he recognized a new threat looming on the horizon. The other species eyed humanity with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion, aware that it was human DNA that had saved them from extinction. "We must work together," Mason implored the assembled delegates. "Only through unity can we hope to—" A Zephyrian representative interrupted, his luminous eyes narrowed. "And who will lead this unity, Admiral? Humanity, with its miraculous cure and martial control." Mason felt the weight of countless lives on his shoulders as he considered his next words carefully. The future of the Alliance hung in the balance, and he knew that his actions in the coming days would shape the course of galactic history. Mason's words hung in the air, the tension palpable as the assembled delegates exchanged uneasy glances. He took a deep breath, steadying himself against the podium. "I propose the formation of a galactic confederacy," he said, his voice carrying across the chamber. "A council of elected representatives from all allied species, working together to forge a lasting peace." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, while others scowled with suspicion. The Zephyrian representative who had interrupted earlier leaned forward, his luminous eyes narrowing. "And how do we ensure this isn't simply a ploy for human dominance?" he challenged. Mason met his gaze unflinchingly. "By crafting a constitution that guarantees equal representation and protects the rights of all member species, we've fought too hard, lost too much, to squander this opportunity for true unity." As the debate raged on, a figure slipped quietly from the chamber. Zelian Zar, a pardoned Bolian politician, made his way to a secluded communication room. His fingers danced across an encrypted terminal, sending a single message: "Initiate Phase 1. Across the galaxy, carefully placed agents received the signal. On New Tharkon, the explosions rocked the main spaceport. On Zephyrus Prime, protesters stormed government buildings, waving banners decrying human influence. The nascent alliance began to fracture under the carefully orchestrated chaos. Aboard the Retribution, Captain Reeves frowned at the incoming reports. "Sir," he said, turning to Admiral Mason, "we're receiving distress calls from multiple systems. It looks like coordinated uprisings." Mason's eyes sharp. "Deploy peacekeeping forces to the affected worlds. Use minimal force. We can't give the Separatists any more ammunition." As Reeves' ships moved to contain the spreading insurrection, they found themselves ambushed by well-armed insurgent vessels. The void erupted in a firestorm of energy weapons and missiles. "Evasive maneuvers," Reeves shouted as his flagship rocked under the barrage. "Where did they get this kind of firepower?" Light years away on the research station orbiting Arisia Prime, alarms blared. Dr. Alara Zendari sprinted through the corridors, her heart pounding. She skidded to a halt before a massive blast door, quickly inputting her security codes. The door slid open, revealing a cavernous chamber. At its center floated a holographic representation of a barren world, slowly transforming into a lush, habitable planet. "The Genesis Project," Alara whispered, her eyes wide with fear. She turned to her team. "Lock it down, now!" But before they could act, the station shuddered. The sounds of weapons fire echoed through the halls. Back on Earth, Mason received the urgent transmission. His face paled as he listened to the frantic report. "Lieutenant Saldana," he barked, turning to his trusted officer. "Assemble a strike team. You need to secure the Genesis facility before it falls into enemy hands." Saldana nodded grimly, already moving to carry out the order. As she left, Mason's gaze fell on the galactic map dominating his office wall. The carefully negotiated alliance was unraveling before his eyes. He took a deep breath, his mind racing. There was only one path forward, one chance to salvage this dream of unity. He tapped his comm unit. "This is Admiral Mason. I'm calling for an emergency Confederacy Constitutional Convention. Neutral ground, Avalon. We have one last chance to get this right." As the message went out, Mason couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into the lion's den. But the stakes were too high to do anything else. The future of the galaxy hung in the balance, and he would be damned if he let it slip away without a fight. The Avalon Conference Center buzzed with tension as delegates from across the galaxy filed into the main chamber. Eugene Mason stood at the podium, his exoskeleton whirring softly as he surveyed the assembled representatives. The weight of countless worlds pressed down upon his shoulders. "We stand at a crossroads," Mason began, his voice carrying across the hushed room. "The xenogen crisis has been contained, but our unity hangs by a thread. We must forge a new path forward. Together." As Mason outlined his vision for a galactic confederacy, Zelian Zar slipped out of the chamber unnoticed. In a secluded alcove, he activated a quantum encrypted communicator. "Initiate Phase 1, he whispered. Across the stars, carefully planted agents sprang into action. On New Tharkon, Explosions rocked the main spaceport, sending plumes of acrid smoke billowing into the sky. Zephyrus Prime erupted in chaos as protesters stormed government buildings, their angry chants echoing through the streets. Aboard the Retribution, Captain Reeves's face paled as reports flooded in. "Sir," he called to Mason via holographic link, "we have multiple systems reporting coordinated uprisings." Mason's eyebrows furrowed. "Deploy peacekeeping forces. Minimal force only. We can't give the Separatists any more ammunition." As Reeves's ships moved to contain the spreading insurrection, they found themselves ambushed by well-armed insurgent vessels. The void erupted in a firestorm of energy weapons and missiles. "Evasive maneuvers," Reeves shouted, his flagship rocking under the barrage. Where did they get this firepower? Light years away on the research station orbiting Orisia Prime, alarms blared. Dr. Alara Zendari sprinted through the corridors, her heart pounding. She skidded to a halt before a massive blast door, quickly inputting her security codes. The door slid open, revealing a cavernous chamber. At its center floated a holographic representation of a barren world, slowly transforming into a lush, habitable planet. "The Genesis Project," Alara whispered, her eyes wide. She turned to her team. "Lock it down, now!" But before they could act, the station shuddered. The sounds of weapons fire echoed through the halls. Back on Avalon, Mason received the urgent transmission. His face paled as he listened to the frantic report. "Lieutenant Saldana," he barked, turning to his trusted officer. "Assemble a strike team. Secure the Genesis facility before it falls into enemy hands." Saldana nodded grimly, already moving to carry out the order. Months passed as Mason worked tirelessly to stabilize the core allied worlds under the interim Galactic Confederacy government. The Xenogen pandemic had left entire sectors as contaminated wastelands. Dr. Zendari's science teams spearheaded intensive decontamination efforts, but progress was painfully slow. Captain Reeves's depleted armada stretched thin, subduing scattered uprisings across multiple star systems. The Confederacy's fledgling institutions struggled to take root amidst the chaos. In the shadows, Zillion Zar continued his machinations. He met with Dejor Venk, a scarred Zephyrian crime lord, in a dimly lit backroom on Omega Station. "The humans grow complacent," Zar purred, sliding a data crystal across the table. "With this, you can strike at the heart of their power." Venk's cybernetic eye whirred as he examined the crystal. "Xenogen bioweapon schematics," he growled, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "This will fetch a pretty price on the black market." "More than that," Zar leaned forward, his voice low. "It's our key to toppling Mason's regime." As Zar and Venk plotted, Lieutenant Saldana infiltrated the crime lord's inner circle. She crouched in a ventilation shaft, her augmented senses straining to catch every word of their conversation. "By the stars," she whispered, her blood running cold as she decrypted the stolen data. "They're planning to hit Terra Nova during the council inauguration." Saldana's fingers flew across her wrist computer, transmitting a coded warning to Mason. But as she prepared to exfiltrate, a shadow fell across the grate. She looked up to see Venk's cybernetic eye staring directly at her. "Well, well," the crime lord growled. "What have we here?" Alarms blared as Saldana burst from her hiding place, drawing her sidearm in one fluid motion. She ducked and weaved through the station's winding corridors, Venk's mercenaries in hot pursuit. "Sergeant Taylor," she barked into her comm unit, narrowly dodging a burst of plasma fire. "I need immediate extraction." Taylor's strike team breached the station moments later, laying down suppressing fire as Saldana sprinted towards their waiting shuttle. As they blasted free of the docking clamps, Saldana's gaze fell on the data crystal clutched in her hand. "We've got the intel," she reported to Mason. "But, sir, we might already be too late." On Terra Nova, preparations for the inaugural ceremony were in full swing. Mason stood before a mirror, adjusting his formal uniform. A chime at the door announced Captain Reeves's arrival. "Security sweeps are complete, sir," Reeves reported. "No sign of any threat." Mason nodded, his expression grim. "Let's hope it stays that way." As Mason took the stage before the assembled dignitaries, Sergeant Taylor's team raced towards the planet's surface. In the cargo hold, Dr. Zendari worked feverishly to synthesize a countermeasure to the stolen Xenogen strain. "We're cutting it too close," Taylor growled, checking the readout on his tactical display. "Venk's ships have already entered the system." Saldana's voice crackled over the comm. "I've identified the infiltrators in Mason's security detail, sending you their positions now." The inauguration speech was in full swing when chaos erupted. Taylor's team burst into the auditorium, weapons raised. "Everyone down!" he roared as plasma bolts sizzled through the air. Mason dove for cover, his exoskeleton whirring as he rolled behind a pillar. He watched in horror as members of his own security detail turned their weapons on the crowd. "Reeves!" he shouted. "Get these people out of here!" As Taylor's team engaged the infiltrators, a sinister hiss filled the air. Green mist began to seep from hidden canisters, spreading rapidly through the chamber. "Xenogen!" Zendari's voice rang out over the comms. "Don't let it touch you!" Saldana sprinted through the chaos, her augmented reflexes allowing her to dodge the growing cloud of viral particles. She reached Mason's position, pulling him to his feet. "We need to move, sir," she urged. "The Retribution is standing by for immediate evac." As they raced towards the landing pad, Mason's mind reeled. The carefully constructed peace he had fought so hard to achieve was unraveling before his eyes. And somewhere out there, Zillion Tsar watched and waited, ready to capitalize on the coming storm. The Retribution's engines roared to life as the last of the evacuees were brought aboard. Mason stood on the bridge, watching Terra Nova recede into the distance. His expression hardened as he turned to face his assembled officers. "This ends now," he declared, his voice filled with cold grit. "Initiate emergency protocols. As of this moment, we are at war." "As of this moment, we are at war," Mason declared, his voice carrying the weight of a galaxy teetering on the brink. The bridge of the Retribution fell silent, the gravity of the situation settling over the assembled officers. Captain Reeves stepped forward, his face tight with certainty. "Sir, what are your orders?" Mason's eyes swept across the tactical display, taking in the rapidly deteriorating situation across multiple sectors. "We need to regroup and fortify our position, set course for Earth. It's time we took stock of our resources and planned our next move." As the Retribution accelerated towards the heart of human space, reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The carefully negotiated peace was unraveling at an alarming rate. Zillion Tsar's agents had struck with surgical precision, exploiting every weakness in the fledgling Confederacy. In his quarters, Mason pored over intelligence reports, his exoskeleton whirring softly as he paced. The dream of a unified galaxy seemed to slip further away with each passing moment. He tapped his comm unit. "Dr. Zendari, what's the status of the Genesis project?" Alara's hologram flickered to life, her expression a mix of excitement and apprehension. "We're making progress, Admiral, but the potential risks, they're astronomical." Mason nodded, his face a mask of stone. "Accelerate your research. We may need it sooner than we thought." Weeks passed as Mason worked tirelessly to stabilize the situation. The Xenogen crisis had left scars across the galaxy, and now Tsar's insurrection threatened to tear everything apart. In a secure chamber deep within Earth's Central Command, Mason addressed the remaining loyal members of the Confederacy Council. "The experiment in galactic democracy has failed," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "From this moment forward, I am disbanding the Council and instituting martial law across all human-controlled space." A chorus of protests erupted, but Mason raised his hand, silencing the room. "This is not a decision I make lightly, but we cannot afford the luxury of debate while our enemies gather at our gates." As news of Mason's declaration spread, reactions varied across the galaxy. Core worlds tightened security, grateful for the promise of stability. On the fringes, however, anti-human sentiment festered and grew. Aboard the Retribution, now serving as Mason's mobile command center, Captain Reeves coordinated the deployment of peacekeeping forces. Lieutenant Saldana's strike teams moved swiftly, neutralizing threats before they could take root. But for every fire they extinguished, two more seemed to ignite. Zillion Tsar remained elusive, always one step ahead of Mason's forces. His guerrilla tactics struck at the heart of human supply lines and shipyards, crippling the Confederacy's ability to project power across the vast expanse of space. In a hardened bunker on Arisia Prime, Dr. Zendari and her team worked feverishly on the Genesis project. The barren world outside their viewport slowly transformed, patches of verdant growth spreading across its surface like a time-lapse of evolution itself. "We're pushing the boundaries of science here," Zendari muttered, her eyes fixed on a holographic display of rapidly mutating DNA strands. "If this works, we could reshape entire worlds in a matter of days." As Mason's forces engaged in an increasingly desperate war of attrition against Tsar's insurgents, Captain Reeves pored over intelligence reports in his quarters. Something about the pattern of attacks nagged at him, a sense that they were missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. He input a series of commands, correlating attack data with known xenogen outbreaks and the location of key research facilities. As the computer processed the information, Reeves' eyes widened in horror. "By the stars," he whispered, reaching for his comm unit. "Admiral Mason, we have a situation. I think I know Tsar's endgame." Mason's hologram materialized, his expression grim. "Go ahead, Captain." "Sir, I believe Tsar's true target is the Genesis project. If he can sabotage the mutagenic process, he could trigger a chain reaction that would make the xenogen crisis look like a common cold." Mason's face paled. "A scorched galaxy scenario. We can't let that happen. Assemble a strike team immediately. We're going to Arisia Prime." As Reeves mobilized his forces, Mason knew they were racing against time. The fate of not just humanity, but all life in the galaxy hung in the balance. And somewhere out there, Zillion Tsar watched and waited, ready to strike the final blow in his war of vengeance.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.